All right, I'm going to go ahead and start, please, now. And my name is Gillian Tett. I'm with the Financial Times. And it is my very great pleasure today to have a chance to have a question and answer session with President George Bush, 43rd President of America. A man who needs absolutely no introduction, so I won't waste time with that. I'll simply say that we also have David Rubenstein, who is a man who's known to many of you in the room as a great investor. He's been to Yes Forum, been to Ukraine before. What may be less well known is that he's also a great student of history and a great supporter of history. And we're going to be talking in the next half hour about both the past and the future. In particular, about NATO. Those of you who were in the session earlier will have heard Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of the UK, express with a great deal of sorrow and anger what a terrible mistake it had been not to let Ukraine into NATO earlier, and to express sadness at the opposition of countries like France and Germany who had blocked that. One person who did not block that, of course, though, was President Bush. In fact, at the 2008 summit, NATO summit in Bucharest, he called for a clear path forward for admitting both Georgia and Ukraine into NATO. So I'm going to throw it over to David in a second, but there are questions here which are very important for the future and for the present, if not the past. What would have happened if President Bush's suggestion about giving a clear path for NATO membership had indeed been implemented? What does he think about the future? Should there be a clear path now? If so, how possible is it? And is this something which America is willing to support, given what might be called the emotive nature of American politics today? David, I often think, is a wannabe journalist who has a sideline these days asking questions and being an interviewer. So David, I'm going to toss it over to you now and stand by ready to pick up if there is any gap in the conversation. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I cannot be in Ukraine today with you all, but I thought it would be better and more helpful to everybody if I did this interview with President Bush, and I want to thank President Bush for doing this. We are at the Bush Institute in Dallas now, joining the campus of SMU, and a university that Laura Bush, President Bush's wife, attended. So President Bush, let me start by asking you about a famous quote that you made years ago when you were president. You said you saw Mr. Putin, you looked into his soul, and you didn't seem that concerned. What were you talking about at the time, and are you more concerned about his soul now?
Dave, this was in Slovenia, and at one of Tito's summer houses early in 2001, and Vladimir Putin and I met for the first time. And we sat down. First of all, I dismissed all the delegation. It was just me, Condi, Putin's Condi, and two interpreters. And I wanted to get to know the guy. You know, I think the best kind of diplomacy is personal diplomacy. And so he wants to talk about this, that, or the old Soviet era debt. And he had a huge stack of cards and kind of reading them. And it frankly, it interested me, but I wasn't that interested in a huge stack of cards. And I said to him, is it true your mother gave you a cross you had blessed in Jerusalem? This was a fact that the CIA had dropped on him as part of a background. And his whole countenance changed. He went from tense to relaxed and started talking about his mother and the cross and what it meant to him, that it had been rescued. And I asked him about his daughters. He and Ludmilla had two daughters, and he was talking about their interests, and I told him about our daughters. And so we established a really good rapport. And we began a working relationship. And so this comment came at a press conference. The question was asked by an AP reporter. Do you trust Putin? Now, keep in mind, I'm kind of trying to get a personal relationship with him. And if the answer was no, I don't trust him, it would have been hard to have a personal relationship. But trust but verify had already been used by Ronald Reagan, and I didn't want to be viewed as a plagiarist. Right? And so I said, yes, and kind of hoped the reporter moved on. I said, why? And I said, because I looked in his eyes and saw his soul. And it was such a befuddling answer, they went on to another question. But it was really referring to the fact that he had this great kind of emotions about something as significant as the cross. And had I looked in his eyes at the end of my presidency, I would have seen a different soul. In my judgment, it darkened up. He became infected with power and money and, you know, perhaps sex. And he was a different guy.
So, in light of what you saw during the whole of your presidency, are you surprised that he decided to try to invade Ukraine?
I'm not surprised that he would view weakness as an opportunity to reestablish a Russian empire. And I think he saw weakness, frankly, as a result of U.S. and allied reaction in Afghanistan. We needlessly pulled out, and the world goes, what the hell is America all about? You know, is it not willing to honor its commitment to girls and women, for example? And I think Putin saw that as an opportunity, as did, by the way, Chinese and Iranians and everybody else who is not on the same side of freedom as we are. And so he's got a chip on his shoulder.
So
you got to ask why. I mean, I just discovered it when I introduced him to my little dog Barney, who's a Scottish Terrier, and he kind of dissed him, you know, like call that thing a dog. Anyway, a year later, Laura and I go visit him outside of Moscow, and he said, "You want to meet my dog?" I'd forgotten about the Barney diss, of course, and I said, "Yeah." And outbound's a huge Russian hound, and he looks at me and goes, "Bigger, stronger, and faster than Barney." I tell this Canadian Prime Minister, and he goes, "At least he only showed you his dog." Oh. Yeah. Anyway, so it's a. So you got to. So here's the thing. It was I think an interesting insight, because it says, you know, I've got a chip on my shoulder, and so you got to ask why. And in his mind, the demise of the Soviet was a terrible moment for the Russian people, and what you're watching him is try to reinstate Russian glory, not necessarily in the, you know, the communist mode, but in the empire mode.
So you visited Ukraine when you were president?
Yeah, I did.
And your impression then was it was operating okay as an independent country?
Yeah, I mean, as far as, you know, look, when you're the president, they put you on the Cook's tour. You know, you don't. So, yes, I went to the war graves of the people slaughtered by the Soviets, and I met the young leaders, opposition as well as those in power. It seemed to me there was a vibrant democracy going on, but I'm also aware that young democracies take time, and it takes the support of older democracies to give them a chance to develop the civil society necessary to be peaceful.
Now, during your presidency, there was a suggestion that maybe at some point Ukraine could become a member of NATO.
Yeah, more than a suggestion. This is in Bucharest, and I called our allies together and said, let's provide a membership application process to Ukraine and Georgia, with the idea being that in order to get into NATO, there has to have the habits of democracy, sustained habits of democracy. And I thought that that would be an interesting way to lock in some of the reforms that these countries had put in place. It wasn't provocative against anybody. It was really a way of cementing alliances with important young democracies. And it was fought bitterly, primarily by Germany and France. You know, we were heroes with the Poles and the Lithuanians and the Latvians and the Estonians, these young democracies that knew the importance of NATO in their lives, and they wanted to see it extended to Ukraine and Georgia. But no, it got Angela Merkel put her foot down pretty hard.
So some people would say that the idea that Ukraine might become a member of NATO is what propelled Putin forward in this invasion.
You know, they hadn't looked in his eyes and seen his soul, you know. This is an empire builder. It has nothing to do. It's a convenient excuse for Putin's people and critics of U.S. policy. No, this was not provocative. He told me that his dog was bigger than my dog way before the opportunity to get into NATO, and I say that seriously. That this has been on his mind. The fact that he was part of a diminished power, and he wanted to reinstate Russian glory. And so I find that, I don't think that's anything close to the truth.
So today, the United States has been very supportive of Ukraine, and NATO has been as well. But do you think that will continue? Is there the lack of patience in the United States and support the United States for continuing this for another couple of years if necessary?
I think first of all, I believe we ought to support Ukraine until Russia is driven out of the country, and I believe the Ukrainians can prevail. After all, they are a people fighting. They're a young democracy fighting for their own freedom. And you know, when people fight for your own freedom in your own homeland, it provides an extra incentive. And so, yeah, I think they will prevail. Whether or not the United States stays steady, it's hard to tell, David, because there's isolationist movements in our country. And, you know, I think one of the things that the Ukrainians need to be concerned about in order to maintain U.S. support is corruption. They got to make sure that our taxpayers' money is not taken for purposes other than defending Ukraine against Russia, because it provides a convenient, first of all, it irritates Americans to think their money is going to somebody's pocket. And it ought to irritate Ukrainians who expect the monies that the free world is offering them to defend their country, to stay in the defense of their country. And so I noticed President Zelensky, they start moving people around from their cabinet, which suggests to me that he's trying to get ahead of corruption, which is really important. You know, it's an interesting question you ask. Will the United States hang in there? Right now, the political attitude is pretty good. We got a presidential election coming up. You know, we're going to see how quick people try to head for the exits as a way to entice the U.S. voter. The voices here at the Bush Center are going to be, we defend freedom, and we're for the freedom of the Ukrainian people, and we're going to hang in there with them.
So you do think that the election, if the election went a certain way, it's possible that American support could be reduced?
Well, all I can tell you is what happened in Afghanistan. You know, both parties' leaders wanted to get out of Afghanistan, unnecessarily so, by the way, and the consequences were grave. And so I think both parties have got isolationist wings, and it's going to be very important for leadership to explain to the American people why Ukraine is important to the United States' security interest. One way to put it is this: either we're a nation who honors our commitments or we're not. And if Ukraine were to fall to Russia, we'll be involved with Poland or Lithuania and Latvia or Romania. In other words, this is step one. This isn't the final step for Putin. He wants a large empire, and now's the time to stop him. I will tell you what has impressed Americans, though, is Zelensky. He's a tough dude. You know, he's hanging in. He's a Texan.
Have you talked to him? Have you talked to him since the war started?
I have. I told him, hang in there. We'll do all we can at the Bush Center to help him. I call him the Winston Churchill of the 21st century, and he's willing a country through. And it's impressive leadership under dire circumstances. Look, this is the guy's dodging missiles. You know, Putin's got operatives on the ground in Kyiv trying to catch him. He's under big pressure. As a matter of fact, one of the things he told me that his biggest concern is being separated from his family, which is awesome when you think about it. He's got the right priorities, and he's the kind of leader you like. But yeah, he's good.
So all wars eventually end. This war will presumably end at some point. But do you think when it ends, it will result in some of Ukraine still having?
Yeah. Well, let me correct you there. First of all wars don't necessarily end. The Korean War never ended.
Well, had a truce. You're right.
Armistice. Yeah, truce. I want to use a little bigger word.
Okay. All right. Armistice. So, all right, you could have an armistice here.
You could. Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be up to the Ukrainians, though. The United States should not try to impose a peace on a democratically elected government. We ought to consult. We ought to say, you know, we're interested in your opinion, but we ought not, because we're weary, demand that the Ukrainians give up a certain amount of territory to an invader. And so, I don't know. Can they?
So on the issue that often people talk about, Crimea, you would say let the Ukrainians decide what they want to do on Crimea, try to get it back, or?
Well, that's a military question, and you and I are inept about talking about military matters.
Okay, well, I certainly am not, but so let me...
Don't believe that in Kyiv. Anyway, go ahead.
So let me ask you generally, now you're a former president. Some people would say that's a great job to have as a former president. You don't have responsibilities day to day. Are you enjoying your life as a former president?
Yes. I enjoyed my life as president, mainly because I was surrounded by a very competent group of people, most of whom stayed throughout the 8 years when I was president. And I learned a lot, David, and I'm glad I'm not president. I think 8 years is enough to be in power. And I love being in Texas. I love being around my wife. We're doing great things here at the Bush Center. I don't miss power and fame. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to regain a sense of anonymity, but it's not working very well.
So how is your health?
77-year-old guy, I'm doing okay. I mean,
all right.
If I got in a foot race with Clinton, I might be able to beat him.
Okay. So you've spent a lot of your post-presidency with veterans.
A ton.
We're in an audience now. We're filled. You can't see it in Ukraine, but this audience is filled with veterans and veterans' families. Why is it so important to you to spend time with veterans?
Well, like you, I'm a product of the Vietnam era, where we had a draft, and there was great bitterness toward our military and toward the government. We get attacked. I said we're going to defend ourselves, and millions of people volunteered. And it's an amazing outpouring of patriotism and sacrifice that impressed me. Secondly, as the commander-in-chief, I got to know a lot of the active duty people, and they're an impressive lot of people. Thirdly, many got hurt as a result of my command. And I think all of us in society have an obligation to help those.
Right.
And I feel a special obligation. I ride mountain bikes with them, I play golf with them, but as importantly, here at the Bush Center, we help them help others. And it's an extraordinary group of people. As a matter of fact, you might not have bought my art book. Maybe they have in Kyiv.
Well, speaking about your art book,
98 veterans I painted and told their stories.
Nobody really thought you were an artist when you were president.
Nobody thought I could read.
No, I don't know about that. But when did you take up art, and why are you so committed to it still?
I took up art because of Winston Churchill. And by chance, I read an essay that he wrote, and it struck me as something that, wow, it made sense for me to think about trying. I went home and told my wife, Laura, I'm going to become an artist. If Churchill can paint, I can paint.
What did she say?
You're out of your damn mind. And I hired Gail, and off we go. And
so you paint every day?
Yeah, I do. It's changed my life.
But you don't sell the paintings. You give them away, or?
Some. I gave a lot of the big exhibits we give here to the Bush Center as part of its endowment.
And today, at the Bush Center, your main focus is on what areas?
Well, veterans, helping veterans recover from transition from military life to civilian life. These are people who take a sense of personal responsibility beyond the norm, and they're going to be big contributors to the future of the country. We spent time in Africa on health, particularly cervical cancer. And we're right now all involved with trying to get PEPFAR reauthorized, which is the AIDS initiative on the continent of Africa, where 22 million people now live who would have died thanks to the American people. We're big defenders of the marketplace. We're big believers in trade, particularly in our own hemisphere. We have got a leadership program with your friend Clinton and me and Dad and Lyndon Johnson's libraries to develop a whole sense of responsible leadership for the future.
Right. So
anyway, we're doing a lot of stuff, Dave.
When you were elected president, was it complicated because your father had been president and people were always saying, well, you're going to be doing things like your father did, or how was that?
Well, it's life, and it should be, you ought to extend it a little more broad than being president. Was it complicated to grow up with a famous man who you adored? And, yes, it would have been, except he was such a cool guy who never tried to put pressure on me or my brothers or my sister. He said, I'm going to help you get educated, and then you got to figure out your own way. And had he been, a bully or a not a real gentleman, it would have been very complicated. And so whether it be following in his footsteps to be president or following in his footsteps in other parts of life, it was not all that difficult. And, as a matter of fact, I'm very fortunate because I was able to get phone calls from somebody who I admired and adored during the dark moments of my presidency, and here on the end of the phone, son, I know what you're going through. I just want to know how proud I am of you. He didn't give me advice, do this, do that. He said, I'm proud of you. Which, if you're a dad and you say that to your son, it's unbelievably important for the son to hear it. And so,
did your mother say the same thing, or she?
No, what she said, occasionally, Dave, as you knew her well, she had a different point of view about things at times. And like when I was getting ready to run against Ann Richards for governor of Texas, she said, I hear you're going to run against Ann Richards. I said, I am, Mom. She said, you're not going to win.
Not very supportive.
Well, she was supportive in the end. Yeah, she was something.
Right. So you're elected president of the United States after the long, drawn-out fight in Florida. 9/11 happens in September, 9 months into the presidency. What was your reaction when the famous picture when Andy Card goes up to you and tells you there's been an attack on the World Trade Center?
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking Note Rattle the kid that was reading poetry or reading a book to me. I mean, I'm in a second grade class, and I knew that the eyes of the nation were on me then because the TV cameras were right there in the classroom, and I was projected a sense of calm. I said, be calm. I didn't know what all this meant, of course, but just waited for the right moment to leave the classroom and start collecting facts, developed a strategy, and but there was no doubt in my mind it was a declaration of war, and no doubt in my mind we were going to get after them to protect the United States, the most important job of government.
So later, under President Obama, Osama Bin Laden was killed. Did he call you before the announcement, President Obama?
I think so, yeah. I was eating, I know what I was eating a souffle, which is not in real character, I know. People in Kyiv probably thought I'd be eating barbecue or something. Anyway, they said, President would like to speak to you, so I didn't eat my dessert. And I went home, and he called and gave me a heads up.
So,
and I wasn't joyful. I was pleased. I was pleased that our intelligence community and our military, all the work that went into it, starting on September the 11th, 2001, came to fruition. But I was worried that people say, well, this is over. The ideological conflict inherent in Al-Qaeda is over, when in fact it's not over. One of the lessons of 9/11 is that the condition elsewhere matters to our national security. The condition in Ukraine matters to the security of the United States. And we've lost that lesson. It only took 20 years to fade out of our memories, the importance of the lesson. But it's still real. And therefore, the United States has still got to remain strong, active, and support people like Zelensky when they show courage.
So your father was, in effect, the ambassador to China, and obviously China is a country you've dealt with. Are you worried about anything relating to China in the United States at this point?
Well, I find it interesting that Xi Jinping has hooked his star to Putin in the Ukrainian conflict. I mean, this is not a very free society these days, and he teamed up with a person who doesn't believe in freedom, evidently, and they're allies. And it's a way to, I think, for China to try to diminish the role of the United States. Right now, it looks like you kind of bet on a bad horse. The Russians aren't doing all that well on the ground. I view Xi Jinping as a competitor. He's got a real problem in that he's got a terrible demographic, old people, and there was a period of time when little baby girls were aborted, and so there's not like there's a lot of men, and he's kind of appears to me has snuffed out a lot of their entrepreneurship. And Chinese are very inventive, smart people, and yet, in order to build up the rule of the Communist Party, those outside the Communist Party, or those who are showing independence, are kind of reined in, and therefore his economy is flailing. I do worry about Taiwan, and I want to applaud the United States and President Biden for strengthening our alliances in regard to the Far East. Like, when the South Korean president and the Japanese prime minister, South Korean prime minister, Japanese prime minister came to Camp David with President Biden, it was a clear signal that said, let's put aside your animosities and let's focus on China. Same with the alliance with India, Australia, Philippines, Japan, and Korea. Those are smart moves.
So after you graduated from Harvard Business School, you came back to Texas and you went into the oil business.
Yeah, mediocre.
Well,
business,
it was
I tried, but yeah.
Oil business. You were in that. Energy is an important issue for the United States now, as it is for the world. Are you worried about the United States' ability to produce enough oil? And are you worried about climate change as well, which is something some people are concerned about with respect to whether we produce more oil in this country?
Yeah, well, we need to produce energy. When I was president, we were dependent on oil from the Middle East, which puts you in a kind of a national security bind when certain issues came up. And now, because of some of the greatest technological advances ever, we're independent from the world's supply of energy. And yeah, we need hydrocarbons. We need all the above. It's been hot as heck here in Texas, and the wind wasn't blowing. And so all of a sudden, the utilities had a little trouble generating electricity. And all it's going to take is there to be no electricity when it's 110 degrees, and all of a sudden, people are going to start saying, hydrocarbons, they're more reliable. Anyway, the point is that we need electricity in order to grow our economies. We need to be wealthy in order to have the capacity to develop new technologies. And we got to view this as a transition period. And so I'm unabashed about the need for oil and gas.
So, well, in the remaining time we have, let's finish on Ukraine. So on Ukraine, do you think there should be any timetable on how long the United States will continue to support Ukraine?
No, I don't. I think that'd be a huge mistake. All that means Putin just have to wait us out. And by the way, the minute the United States sets a timetable, other nations will be pressured to set a timetable. The timetable is up to Zelensky. And, we want to work with you. And we're hanging in there with you. Let's get things done. I thought the question was going to ask, have we provided enough military arms to Ukraine? I don't know the answer to that question. I would hope we have provided what they need. I'm not sure. But we're in, and now that we're in, we got to give them what they need to win. Not just us, by the way. I mean, we, the nations, the collective nations who believe in a free Ukraine.
So Prigozhin, who was the head of the Wagner Group, died in a plane crash.
Yeah, he did.
Shocking to you?
No, what's shocking to me is I saw a picture the other day of a G8 summit in St. Petersburg where he was the guy serving me the food. He was Putin's chef, and he was in the picture. And, so he said, well, you remember him? I said, no, all I know is I survived. And, but it's...
You think Putin can survive? If the war is resolved in a way that's not favorable to Russia, do you think Putin can survive?
That's going to, the really important statement I can make on that is that's up to the Russian people. That's not up to the American people. It's not up to the Ukrainian people. It's up to the people of Russia to decide. They're smart people. And, can he survive? I don't know. I don't know enough about internal politics these days.
But today, you would say that Mr. Putin has as much power as he ever had when you were president, or you think it's reduced in Russia?
I think he's more powerful today than he was when I was president. And he's a wily politician who's not afraid to use power to affect his future. And we'll see. I mean, he bit off a little more than he can chew, and his military's got to be just. Morale's got to be brutal. And these kids get conscripted, sent over there for no justification, no reason. You got to have a military that's motivated based upon a cause that's easy to understand and supportable. The cause of trying to take away the freedom of the Ukrainian people is a dismal cause.
So you made pursuit of freedom a major part of your presidency. Any regrets about any of that?
No. Hell, you want peace? There's got to be free societies. I believe everybody wants to live in a free society. I know it's labeled naive by some, but that's not labeled naive by people who live in a free society. I believe Muslim women want to be free from the clutches of, barbaric men. I believe people want to have a chance to vote corrupt people out of office. I believe mothers want their children to have good schools, and if the politicians don't provide it, then they want to have a recourse. And so, no, I believe that freedom yields peace. And I can cite example after example after example of our allies. Like my buddy Koizumi, the head of Japan, our fathers fought each other. And after 9/11, he became our strongest ally. And so you got to ask, what happened? You know, like, is it fate? Did it have to happen? Didn't have to happen?
Well, one of the changes since you left the presidency is you now have grandchildren.
I do. 4.
4. And what do they call you?
Jefe.
Not Mr. President?
No, they call me Jefe, which you live up east, you're not sure about the Spanish dialect, but that's a boss.
Boss. And do you spoil your grandchildren, or?
Try to. Yeah, I do. And our little daughters are fabulous mothers. And they married good guys, and so all's well in the Bush family.
President Bush, we are out of the time we allocated for this. I want to thank you for giving us your insights on Ukraine and other things, and congratulations on building the center and the work you've done for veterans. Thank you very much.
You bet. Yeah, happy to do it. I was supposed to say something. Slava? Slava Ukraine. That means continue to hang in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Okay.